good to see you all again.
On episode 3.
No. Children's Week already.
I know, early curveball.
Where's the time going? It's whizzing by, isn't it?
Yeah, we say that, but we've still loads of people to get through, so it's still quite awesome.
Although they're getting better with the editing, because some people fell into the background and we didn't really see them at all.
No.
And they tend to they focus just on those 3 or 4 that were good and bad, really, didn't they?
And what I felt with this episode as well, there were no backstories either. I mean, we had the history bit, which I want more of, but we had no sort of going to visit family. So I felt we had a bit more time focusing on the sewing and the actual, the skills.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to get that now, because I think the first 2 episodes, they probably did half and half in terms of the stories. And now we can focus, I think.
Yeah. So we all know you loved this week for your children's theme.
Yeah.
So you can kick us off then with the first challenge, which was making that lovely little dress.
The smock dress is great. Now I only know a bit about smocking from the ladies at the shop, but that is doing it the traditional way. Now this was obviously using the machine to do that smocking edge, that effect. So that was it was going to be interesting to see how they do that.
Yes. Isn't it funny? You learn something new. I always thought smocks were very plain, almost like tunics.
Well, that would be a tunic then.
Well, no. Almost like tunics.
Well, it was, wasn't it? Like in that little history bit, it was that long garment with a bit of movability because of that just little bit of smock there.
I didn't realise that elastic was called the smock. That bit of...
Oh, right, okay.
I didn't understand that that's what that was called.
Because I think what you would have found is that you'd have taken the tunic, which was this shapeless thing, and then people would have smocked it to make it fit better and to give it a bit of style. So, yeah,
I always just called those summer dresses because it always just makes me think of when we were growing up. They were always called summer dresses where they were all elasticated in the top half,
Well, that's if you want to take it to the next stage. So you can actually do the smocking with elastic, which is actually then using shearing, and you have to stitch it. Put the elastic onto your bobbin and stitch it through your machine, and then when you let go, you stitch it flat so that when it let go, it shrinks back in.
Oh my God! Yeah,
I figured they probably thought that was too difficult for the challenge.
I agree.
So there were quite a few skills that were being asked for here, wasn't there? With obviously the smocking and the stitching, then the bias binding on the little keyhole button bit at the back.
Yes, I did make my list. So I'm good for my list. So it was a smock dress with decorative stitching that needed to be easily gathered, and that the collar had to be perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
Listen to the instructions at the start, people, because there were not some perfect collars there.
No, it was very important to make sure the colours met and all that kind of good jazz.
And that Peter Pan collar is an iconic look, isn't it? It's got to be right, as Esme said, didn't she?
Yeah.
I think a lot of them should have just gone with the white cotton collar, because at the end of the day, that's kind of timeless, and it would have gone with any of the fabrics they were using. It's when they got a bit clever and thought, oh, not only will I use a contrasting fabric, but I'll decide to do it in the most ridiculous fabric as well that's never going to hold.
Yeah, I was quite surprised with Claire with that, because she used was it a crepey kind of cotton or something, and I was like, oh, but you understand those styles and this is your thing. What were you thinking?
And also Patrick had a conversation with her about that. You would have thought that you'd then go, oh, okay, I'm going to go and change my fabric, unless they're not allowed to. That was
I don't know.
Decision.
No, I think it's very much a case of run to the haberdashery, get what you can.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know.
And it was
Go on. No, I was going to say I was also very surprised with the likes of Therese, who was talking about how confident she was and how she has done this hundreds of times before, and I kind of felt a bit bad for her. I think in her head she was like, oh, I've done this before, and she probably reverted into the pattern of she would normally do it at home and quite relaxed and quite calm about it, and then she was running late and running behind, and
she was the editor's dream, this section, wasn't it? Because she set herself up from the beginning.
I did.
So we knew where
I did write down on mine that the pride comes before a fall, because she was going around there about how wonderful she was, and you could just see it all unraveling. And at one point, I thought, oh, is she just going to have like a bad week and that's her gone?
Yeah.
Because that's what's happened in the past with a couple of good sewers.
Yeah.
What do you think was going through her head then? Because she said, didn't she, at one point to the camera, oh, you know, it's kids, I want to get it precise. Do you think she just got lost in her own world, forgot that she was on a competition maybe, and then just got into her own?
Yes, and I think she probably got rushed because it wasn't precise. Her collar was not even, and the smocking, her stitches were out, you know, when they were.
I think it's like any of us. She's, like she said, she'd made loads of these dresses before, and I suppose there's an element of muscle memory there, and I suppose she went into normal mode, forgetting she's in a competition, and then halfway through, she's realising that she's probably doing too much, and that she just needs to get the basics done, and then of course she ends up having to rush it, which is then where the little bits start to go wrong. But I mean, she didn't do her smocking right, because she sewed her, well, it wasn't really a bodice, but the top and the skirt together, and then did the smocking where you were supposed to smock it and then attach, so that you don't get that seam. And I know she was doing it because she was behind and she was rushing, but that's where you think, yes, she's got into her own head a bit with that.
Now, go from her, though, an experience, to then Matt and Hazel, who have never done it before. How good were those two?
I think Hazel was robbed. I thought hers was just fantastic. I was so impressed with hers. It was
colour choice as well.
I think it was really nicely done, really well finished off, and I just loved loved fabric, colour, favourite, should have won.
I did. Because you've got no experience there, you just follow the instructions and do it. And I think is that why they succeeded?
I think possibly, yeah, because I'd written down that Matt, Hazel, and Liz were my favourites as we were going along, and then of course Matt won it, and you know Hazel wasn't that far behind.
No, Hazel's fourth. So we had Therese at the bottom, understandably so. We then had Matt at the top with that, and a sort of just a good mix in the middle. I mean, Claire was almost bottom because, as you said, Anya, that she chose the wrong fabric there, didn't she, for her Peter Pan collar?
Yeah, very much so. There was lots of just little wee bits I think people just hadn't quite done right. You know, like Peter's gather wasn't quite right, and Fiona missed stitches, and Ali had a slightly wonky cut. You know, there was lots of just little wee mistakes. But
they'd done all well, really, hadn't they?
Yeah.
I mean,
so that was challenge one.
Those embroidery stitches on your machine, unless you've used those, they are, you know, they can be overwhelming, can't they? Because some machines can have like 500 stitches, can't they?
Yeah, but Hazel hadn't used them before, and she was grand.
Yes.
So
I suppose it's that you just can't push the machine too much, because the needle, you know, takes a lot longer to do that embroidery stitch, doesn't it? So you can't rush that stage.
No, you have to just let it do its thing. You have to make sure it's just feeding through and just going at its own pace, because the needle will be leaping around wherever it needs to go.
Yeah. And that was another editor's wonder, you know, dream moment whenever, who is it saying, oh my God, it's the worst thing if the thread breaks, and then moments later, Claire going, oh my God, my thread broke. I
think it was Fiona, because I've written that down underneath her name, but I might be wrong on that. But
I thought it was Claire, because she said, I
think it was Claire. Yeah,
I think Claire said it, but I think it was then Fiona who was actually on the machine.
Yeah. I wasn't sure who had said it, but I did laugh at the botheration. So.
But it was lovely seeing those dresses finished, though, wasn't it? And I think they did do well there. I think that
are you going to create one for the shop?
I think that might be my next one. That's what I was about to say, because on the Great British Sewing Bees website, they have, for the first time ever, they have released a pattern, and they've released the actual pattern that they had on the show. So it's it's written out as they had it, so it's a free download. So we'll put it in the description block.
Why didn't they do the palazzo pants? I want those.
I know they should have done it more, but they, in the little spiel that it says on their website, it says, we are only releasing this one, and we're going to trial, see how it goes. But I'm sure it will go quite well. So yes, that will be next on the list. So, did you all agree with?
I won't hold my breath. You may.
3 months' time. So you all liked Matt's then? You think he was right to be top for that round?
I liked it, yeah. I had it there.
I wanted Hazel, but that's because I preferred her.
Was good. All right, so we then go into the transformation challenge, 90 minutes. This sounded good fun, didn't it?
Oh, God, no, it did not.
No, sleeping bag into a food-shaped fancy dress piece of wear? No?
Well, you were restricted by what colour sleeping bag you had straight away. And there was only so many sleeping bags. But also, I mean, that's just horrible fabric. It's that, like, ripstop type fabric that we had from the year before. And you had all that wadding, which, you know, just pulling a sleeping bag apart, even if you were going to get rid of all the wadding and different bits and pieces, that takes time. And they got 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, go on.
No, go ahead.
Is that where Therese, because I know we were texting at the time, and you said, well, she's not sewing. Was
she? She was using bloody ties.
Is that where Therese got the right idea for 90 minutes? Because you've got so little time, actually, why so? Can you not use other techniques and skills too?
Yeah.
Then that did take her the 90 minutes. There wasn't much more going on in her dress. It was kind of, it was cut kind of on the side and everything, but she didn't do a lot more elsewhere because she'd done so many. I mean, it did look good, don't get me wrong. It did look good, but she couldn't do much else because it took such a long time to create that anyway.
Yeah, this is true. But she did finish it off though, so she did her edges and she did all kind of jazz. So there was some sewing. I thought it was incredibly clever. It's like, well, that's in your brain right there.
Yeah, it was, and you can't dispute that. And she, you know, she rightly deserved to win up against all of those other ones as well. There was, I must admit, I was kind of after the first one thinking, oh, perhaps she'll go out this week. But you had to give it to her because even up against the others, I mean, some of them had done a lot of sewing. You know, Mark's packet of crisps and the pizza.
I love the crisps. That was
Ali's pizza and everything like that. They'd put a lot on to their sleeping bags. So, you know, there was a range of skills there, but there was a couple of dodgy ones as well.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I put down on my notes, you're looking at the skills, but then versus that simplicity of getting it done and noticeable, you know, and some of the others, they did a lot of sewing, but then was it really clear what the object food was?
I don't think we can trust Esme's thing here. I was so surprised. She was like, what is that? Just like, it's sushi, seriously. And the pizza.
It was a pizza as well. It was like, how can you not?
I know. And I think with the watermelon as well. Oh no, maybe she got that one immediately. But there was someone who's like, oh no, Esme pet, are you okay?
So what I found also interesting was so Therese had done the grapes with this wonderful, simple sort of green sort of like bunting, wasn't it, to be the top of the grapes? Yeah. Yet Nicole's carrot, she had that sort of wispy green netting. I wonder why she didn't think of perhaps doing something more bold. Would that have affected her carrot?
It wouldn't look like a carrot, would it?
Oh,
you know what a carrot looks like.
Carrots have got the stalk that comes out the top.
Goes up.
Yeah, well, yes, I suppose it does.
It doesn't come down here, does it?
No, but I suppose it would be
have to
more
take
bold.
you to the farm shop to show you all the veg. This is what it looks like when it comes out of the ground.
She just needed more netting then, didn't she?
Yeah. But to be honest, like, hers wasn't the worst. I think
no.
Matt with what was Matt? I can't even remember.
It was the apple that gave birth to the child through the head.
It looked more like a pea. It looked like a Poddington pea.
Yeah.
You and your Poddington peas.
But as well as that, a Perfy Yona, she had a watermelon as well.
I of course, had written down that one of the key things they said was that shaping was key, which I think is one of the reasons why Therese probably got what she did, because she'd used those polystyrene balls. But then I'd written down that, Liz had tried to do it, but it was just flat, and therefore it lost its shape.
Yes.
And of course, this is supposed to be a fancy dress. You don't just need it hanging. And then Fiona's watermelon, I mean, she suffered a bit because the other watermelon was so good. But again, it was just a bit flat. And
but
then
that's where Claire used to
Matt's apple was just all over the shop. So, I'd kind of pick those three out as the bottom three, and that's pretty much what happened.
And that's where that boning would have helped, even with the apple, to create that circle. I wonder why no one went down that route, because last season, I'm sure everyone was boning, weren't they?
Well, they had to do a task with boning last one.
Right.
So I think it was more recognisable that it was there. Whereas perhaps if you've never boned anything before, then you wouldn't perhaps think that that was the right thing to do.
True. Yeah. Yes, because I think, I loved Hazel's burger idea, but yes, you're right.
Hazel's was very clever, how she got her shaping and stuff. She sandwiched that all up. That was clever.
Yeah.
What do you think was with Mark? Why was it chips? I couldn't understand that. Why was it not crisps?
I don't know, to be honest.
I kept calling it crisps anyway. I was calling it crisps. I was like, no, he said chips. Maybe he's American.
Or maybe it was a bag of frozen McCain's.
Do you think, because we were talking about skills, do you think in this round it is good to ditch the sewing machine? Because even looking at Ali's pizza slice, the pepperonis were like just stitched in the middle, and then this cheese effect was linked together through thread, where I presume that's because it's time. It's easier to do that than put individual bits of cheese sewing it on with the machine.
I
didn't see what she did, but I assumed that she'd perhaps passed lots of bits of yellow thread through the machine, gapping them out, what we would call chain piecing, but instead of doing it that big, she'd done it that big. And then kind of stitched it on like that. But I mean, it depends what the challenge is, isn't it? I mean, this, fancy dress costumes where you perhaps have to attach a lot, fair enough. But, another challenge where, like the shirt one, you had to sew all that together to get it to do something.
Yeah. Because it still is hard, isn't it? 90 minutes. I think mine would, if I ended up doing something like that, I think mine would have ended up like Fiona's and Liz's. It would have just, would you just forget because you haven't got the time to think of getting that shape there?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I think I would probably have struggled in that one. I would have done something random.
But you wouldn't do it in 90 minutes at home unless you got invited to the party last and had 90 minutes until you had to be there.
That's a horrible thought as well, isn't it? We've forgotten. Oh God, I've got to make a fancy dress costume.
Yeah, I've had that. I think we went to a fancy dress years ago, and one of the people turned up with tickets stuck on their shirt because they were like, I'm going to come as a passport or a boarding ticket to an air hostess thing. It was funny. But yeah, it was definitely a lastminute.com.
So with that leaderboard then, with Therese clearly at the top, Matt was at the bottom with his apple, and Claire was very close to the top. It was a close one, wasn't it, between her watermelon and Therese? But I think that was right, wasn't it? Do you all agree with that?
Yeah. I have to say, I didn't think there was anything too controversial in this episode.
No.
I think it was all very... It wasn't predictable, but when you were then presented with, like, these are the finished garments, you could pretty much go, no. There wasn't anything where you thought, I've got that completely wrong.
Yeah. It was another one of those episodes where there was no standout person from the very start, or, it was all middle.
Yeah. So we then go into the made to measure with the Dungarees. 4.5 hours they had for this. Specific things to look out for?
Not tight, needed to be washable.
Okay.
And the length was optional.
Right.
So you could have had your little hot pants if you wanted to, that you do your decorating in.
Yeah.
And I could have had the complete ankle to neck.
Yeah, me too.
So any ones that popped out to you as you watched them making them, were you going, oh yeah, I love that?
Well, and I think I said this on the chat on the night, I loved Mark's choice of fabric. I think that kind of greeny colour and the pink flamingos looked great. But then he kind of made them too tight, and then they were too short, and then he had to shorten them, and I was like, no, you've gone and lost this one, because I think if he'd have got that right, I think he'd have done quite well that week. And I thought it looked, quite sophisticated for a child. The colour choice had been picked quite well, because the flamingo was the bit of fun, and that was on all the edging and everything else. So that was kind of the one that stood out for me, or at least I hoped it was going to. It just didn't turn out top in the end.
I quite liked Claire's with the embroidery on the front pocket. She did that and she tore off the paper. I really liked that effect. And I quite liked the look of hers, and I quite liked the look of Peter's, where it was kind of the land girl, quite utilitarian.
Oh, you see, I thought that was too... When Esme said, "Oh, it's land girl," I think that was too convenient. There was no way he planned for that to look like a land girl. It just looked boring. That horrible brown, and then all the fun was on the inside, and you couldn't see it.
Yes. Now, just talking about that, what is it with this contrasting fabric thing that so many of them are getting themselves in a right mess?
Well,
what is it?
So they didn't mention it this week in terms of don't do it like they did with the palazzo pants. But then I'd written down about a couple of people who had done it, and then they did turn around and say, oh, well, it should be hidden. And I thought, well, actually, on these dungarees for kids, I would have thought that was a bit of more fun added to it.
I can understand on well, when it goes up and over, you can then sometimes see the lining through there. That was fun, but they were really talking about the pockets. You shouldn't see it coming through there.
And I suppose traditionally, like we were talking with the palazzo pants, you shouldn't see the pockets and everything like that. But then if the pocket lining is part of the design, so there was a couple who had like the cutaway pockets. I think Hazel was one of them.
That would have looked good.
She has the other ones.
Spaceman.
They were nice colours, but then they come out with their rules that they hadn't really made clear at the beginning. They did with the palazzo pants, but they didn't with this one. And so I thought that was a bit harsh, especially for children's wear, because they'd find that quite fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of per Hazel, can we just take a moment for her space then? She should have just left it and just gone with the fact that...
she shouldn't. She should have just taken it off. All the time she was faffing about, should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? Should I cut out little spacemen and have them fall in? Oh, I think I'm going to do that. I've got the time. Sod that. Get your seam ripper, get the pocket off and put it on the right way. She could have done that in the time it took her to mess those things up.
So just so people understand, what had happened was that the pocket was upside down, but then Ali came along and gave her an idea and said, oh, you should have a spaceman popping out and falling down. And I think that was the idea that threw her, wasn't it, Anya?
I think so, but she's also, she could have decided not to do that.
But also, Ali was right.
It wasn't you must do this.
It was a very good idea, but she chose not to cut out an individual spaceman and have him fall in. She just cut out a wedge of fabric and patched it on as if there was a big rip there.
If she had have actually, fussy cut around that. And
exactly that.
It would have been
joined up with the stitching as like the little oxygen pipe.
Yeah. She said she didn't want the frayed edge, but Ali had that on her tie-dye splodge, didn't she? That's classic applique, isn't it?
Yeah. But should have been better just repositioning the pockets, because even then, when they got the kid to put his hands in the pocket, he couldn't reach the pockets. They were in the wrong place anyway.
Yeah.
But you're right, Anya. It was so nice. I was wanting her to win because the design of it was clever. Yeah. The red, that nice contrast spaceman pocket where you're supposed to see that, because the pocket is cut away, isn't it? So you then see that. It looked so good in principle, didn't it?
Yeah, I was gutted for her. I was absolutely gutted for her.
Yeah.
I think just once that happened, it seemed to throw her, and she just couldn't recover from it. So, yeah.
But it was interesting, though, that whole argument of Patrick, because it did cut away back to him, didn't it? Where Patrick then said the lining should be invisible, because he was saying that, was it to Fiona, wasn't it? Because Fiona wanted that geometric lining shown on the hem, but then she was going to put it on the pocket as well. And he said it's a red flag. It's a red flag of inaccuracy. So that was...
Fiona was, I mean, God love her, she was car crashing it through the week again.
Yeah.
You know, spoiler alert, she went home. Well, she had to. She'd not had... If you think about poor Alex last week, he'd had a couple of bad weeks and managed to survive by the sheer hell of it. She'd been hanging on by the skin of her teeth. And you can't then turn up after 3 weeks of not fit, or 2 weeks of not finishing your garment, and then in the third week turn up with half a trouser leg done and raw edges and think you're going to stay in the show.
Yeah, it's a shame. Again, it was she would definitely have lots of skill and a lot of talent, but not built for competition where you have to rush and you have to get it done on time. And
I mean,
very skilled, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, I know we always talk about the editing, because I never really saw what she was doing wrong. It's not like you thought hers were overly complicated and she was struggling, or that she decided to do something completely different and she was struggling. It just seemed to be that she couldn't get it done. And yet she did seem to have all the skills.
It was so the time, I think, because Patrick has said to her on this pocket, you shouldn't have any of that line, because she wanted the geometric stuff on inside the pocket. He said, we don't want to see any of that. So she then took even longer sewing the pocket and the lining together so it didn't show through. So I think it was the time spent making sure that the lining didn't show through. Whereas if she just not worried about that fabric, she wouldn't have had to spend so much time making sure it wasn't ever seen.
So you're saying it's Patrick's fault?
No, it's her fault in choosing a contrasting fabric for the lining for the pocket and spending much more time making sure it didn't show through.
But this is where I think they should have stuck up for themselves and gone, these are kids' dungarees. If I was making them for myself, I might, want to do that. But these are kids' dungarees. We've got this nice little pop of colour, pattern, whatever. Yeah. I want it to look like that. She could have styled it out.
It doesn't matter. The whole point of this is to demonstrate eye to detail, being able to scale down and be able to work on very small pieces of thing and have all that detail when it is a small pattern. So they don't care if it's for kids. They're just testing that you can scale everything down and do all the detail on this level. So that's what they're aiming for, I think.
Her geometric fabric was lovely, and that would have looked lovely on the hem, of the.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. If she'd have just gone, okay, thanks, Patrick, off you go, and then just got back to doing what she wanted to do, if she had finished that garment with all the right cuffs and turns and everything, I think it would have looked absolutely fine. But you're right, the pocket threw her. She spent too much time doing that, and then she couldn't do the rest that would have tied it all in.
Yeah.
Now, I liked, as you said, Anya, I liked Claire's Africa, or the safari style. What were your thoughts, though, on the black fabric? So when she had the giraffe on the pockets, I know whether the black was a bit harsh for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was a wee bit too much. Maybe a nice sort of khaki or a nice something would have gone much nicer with it, but...
Or to pick out the fabric that was in the African, the safari fabric, a cream.
But whether she chose that dark fabric because she wanted to do that Africa stitching, didn't she? The outline, and that wouldn't show up on anything if you didn't have a dark enough background.
Good point.
But she still could have gone with a dark brown.
Well, in Dungarees, you can have that top part different to the bottom half.
You can have a contrasting pocket like they did. I mean, Matt's mustard and blue. I love that. He had all of the highlight in the right place. Yeah.
And it was very sweet getting the wee fella to do his little bee.
Yeah, nice.
Yes.
Now, Ting, you haven't mentioned Liz yet and her 90s grunge. I was waiting for you to have a dig there.
Well, it was again, wasn't it? She's certainly she's got an era, like Claire loves the 40s. Liz is clearly stuck in the 90s, a decade I'm glad to see the back of, to be honest. I don't understand. I mean, maybe living through it, I didn't really understand it, but she's obviously found a theme for the 90s that I never really understood.
But I just felt it worked because she got the star.
I mean, she's on my list as one that has just got through because it was. I mean, it wasn't okay. It was good.
But she didn't have any worry of different contrasting fabric linings. She just had the stars and then the red.
No, but she chose to do the red top stitching, and you've got to be really careful where you do that contrasting top stitch.
Yeah, and she had those nice sort of purposely frayed legs.
Yeah. Well, that was the one thing for me when he turned around and said, "Oh, you've used the selvage edge on the bottom." I thought, no, you've just not cut that off. If you wanted that to be a proper feature, you would have frayed it properly. That's the selvage edge. You don't use the selvage edge, not even in the 90s.
That could have been her cheat way of doing it in the amount of time she had. She just did it that way.
The use of skills versus the time that you're there. I think
that's just been clever.
I agree, definitely.
Whatever, she should have frayed it properly.
I quite liked as well Nicole's nautical material. I quite liked that. The more it wasn't finished, she didn't get buttons and things all done. I quite liked her choice of material as well.
Material was nice, yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't finished though, was it? No. Do you think she got glossed over there? She didn't. I thought they could have talked about that a bit more, maybe.
I think there was a lot going on. What with the whole flip-flopping between Therese and that with from the first and second ones, and then with Hazel's pocket drama and everything. Nicole has been allowed to slip into the background this episode, and it's that thing when there's so many in the early phases. She's got away with it this week. Will she get away with it next week? I don't know, because that kind of bottom area, we've kind of been kind of right with who's in that bottom area, and she's not far off that when you look at some of the skills of the others.
It's true.
No.
I mean, and then obviously we've got to talk about Therese, really, because she was. This is where the experience of a sewer really came into play here, didn't it? She'd made that dress before, made that dungarees before, with that fabric before. So she was using everything right, wasn't doing everything right.
Yeah. She was, but it kind of annoys me, not necessarily about Therese. She can choose to do what she wants to do. But, we make a laugh and joke about writing down what the judges want. And, they were saying these are dungarees, they've got to be durable. And okay, she justified by saying, well, my grandchildren, they live out in Dubai and I use this lightweight material. Everyone else was using denim and corduroy because that was kind of what it was supposed to be, about being rough and tumble and everything like that. And I just think that, with that shirt weight cotton, that will rip quite easily if you really were genuinely doing anything in it with it. And I was torn because, you look at her skills and all of the sewing, all of the construction, everything to do with those was perfect. You can't dispute that. But you just think, well, they've pulled up other people in the past about using the wrong types of fabrics and not meeting the brief with the pockets that can be seen and everything like that. And yet, while everything was sewn brilliantly, she chose a fabric that they would have hauled Nicole or Hazel or anyone else over the coals for doing.
Yeah.
I just feel.
I wonder, was it easier for her to work with the lighter material than everybody else who worked with the denim?
Yeah.
That.
You know what I mean? So, there was that for me. It kind of, that rankled me a bit. I'm like, you're making it really easy for yourself. And that's not fair to everybody else who's trying to fill the brief. I
also wrote down, which then I just gave up on because no one mentioned it, but when the model walked down, I didn't think the midriff sat very well. It made her look fat.
A bit high.
And I thought, she's not fat. That little girl was not fat. Yeah. And there was something, and whether it was the cut or the way it had been sewn, but it just made it look really wide.
Or something.
Yeah.
It looked really top heavy. It looked that shape.
Yeah.
It was really weird.
But again, it wasn't picked up on. So
yeah, I sort of the only note I made about hers was lightweight cotton, well sewn. that was it.
Yeah.
So I wasn't overly.
You can't fault her for doing it like that. But it just annoys me with the judges because they would have gone after someone else. I mean, if Alex had still been there, you think all the trouble they gave him last week about using jersey.
Yeah.
In a task where everyone else was using something different, everyone here was using corduroy or denim, and she was using cotton.
We pointed it out last week as well, though. If Alex had pulled it off, and if he had done that shirt too, he wouldn't have got pulled up in it. And that's exactly what Teresa's done. She's pulled it off, and she's put it together really nicely, and they can't find fault with it apart from not using the right fabric. So, and
also, using the wrong fabric wasn't enough this week to go home. There was some serious stuff going on with some of the others. You know, while you've still got people not finishing garments, you can't send Therese home for using the wrong fabric. If everyone had produced the perfect pair of dungarees, then you've got to recognise that she not necessarily followed the brief, but there was too much going on elsewhere to even worry about what Therese had done.
So interesting. So the first challenge, Matt came first and Therese was bottom. The second challenge, Therese was first and Matt was bottom. So where did they then stand in that final made to measure? What you know, that they weren't safe, the pair of them, were they?
Well, I think Therese was. I think she'd come bottom in that one, but with everything she'd done in the past and the stuff she'd done that week, they weren't going to send her home. And it was, okay, Matt didn't win the Dungarees challenge, but he produced a brilliant pair of dungarees.
Yeah. So that's where Hazel suddenly then became a concern, didn't she?
Yeah.
Well, yes and no, because she also did really well with her dress.
She did. Yeah.
And he did the burger as well. So she wasn't too badly off this week. So she actually did fine this week, apart from the dungaree mayhem. And
I think that's what the problem then was that you had Fiona just struggling at every level. And not everyone else was just going on. As we said earlier on, there still was no real standout thing this week. No. There were some nice garments made, but there wasn't the wow factor garments.
No, you're right. And Fiona was still struggling
now.
And she was struggling last week, Fiona. So it was quite clear pretty much through the episode that she was going to be the one that was going to be sent home, wasn't she?
Yeah. And it'll be interesting going forward, though, because I think, you know, we've seen Hazel struggling this week a bit. Nicole kind of went into the background, but I think she'll come back forward. You know, at the bottom, we've got those people moving forward because you've still got people like Ale, people like Therese, people like Mark and Matt. They're good sewers. Unless they have a shocking week, there's still a few to go before you get to them, or at least I would think there is.
Yeah. As you say, unless they have a shocking week, which would be interesting viewing.
Yeah, it's great that it's back, but I need something to do that. But next week is sportswear, isn't it? And last year was that
the tracksuit,
scuba fabric and everything, wasn't it? So it looks like shell suits next week.
It's going to be interesting.
Have you got someone now where you really don't want to see them go? Have you got because I know we sometimes change, and I know you come in and out of your favourites, but have you got someone where I don't want them to go now? I like them.
I'm starting to get attached to Hazel.
Yeah,
I quite enjoy what she did, and I still am enjoying Mark, even though he's had a bit of a hit and miss sort of week. I want to see more of Claire. I want to see more of her stuff.
I think she's got some skills, and therefore she's been able to melt into the background because there's some people there who's been struggling. So I think she'll do quite well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mark has grown on me. Although I quite liked him, like you said, he struggled a bit this week, and I was like, please don't go home.
Yeah.
I like Ali, and she has got some good skills. And I mean, I liked Claire in that first episode. So, you know, I think there's some good ones there. And I would start to be a little bit upset if they went. like now, I feel there's people there who are worse than them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But what about you, Stuart?
Hazel grew on me last week so she grew on me even more, and I was like, when she was doing that spaceman, it's like, oh no, don't be distracted by Ali's idea, just keep doing what you had planned. So I felt I was really worried for her at the end of that one. I still like Therese. I think there's something about her. And Nicole, I think I have gone slightly off. So we all agree we were happy in that respect that it was the right decision for Fiona to go.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
No controversy here.
No. Well, always a pleasure chatting.
Yes, looking forward to next week.
Indeed. What would you sports week? And they've got to do a tennis outfit as well, I think, haven't they? There was some mention about holding balls, weren't there? Tennis balls.
You'll be able to recreate that poster, when you're scratching.
Nobody is getting their bum out. Thank you very much.
Leave us your comments below and all that. Isn't that right? It's what we want on you, isn't it?
Yes. Lots of comments and likes and shares and all that good jazz. And make sure you subscribe so you can get updates. There's a subscription button down here somewhere.
And watch this space as well, because we're hopefully going to have Janet from last year's Sewing Bee on.
Very excited.
Get sewing and speak to you all soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.